Computer. Hi, so welcome to another week of Tuesday Tonic. So this week it's slightly different. We've just got a small panel of us to discuss. So what's going to happen is I'll put this out on YouTube and send it around the network so that people can get a chance to maybe contribute or reflect on our conversation. So what prompted this topic for me today? A couple of weeks ago, we were watching one of my most favourite films, Blazing Saddles. Francis in particular, now Martin and Eddie obviously know Blazing Saddles. Francis, I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I've heard of it, I've never seen it, no, I don't know anything about it.
So it was a 1970s, is it? Mel Brooks film.
Yes,
and it's got a black African American actor in it who starts as a slave working on the railways in the Midwest or in the Old West, and he becomes the town sheriff. And let's just say there's lots of N-words in there. Lots of use of the N-words in there. But there's also other things in there. You know, there's sort of, if you like, points made about how thick some of the white folk are. They're not very bright, they're not very clever. So there's lots of poking fun at things. One of the Native Americans is portrayed as a Jewish person. So lots and lots of, if you like, things we probably will find challenging to watch. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, in light of what's gone on and in light of what's going on around the George Floyd murder, is it appropriate for us to be still watching films like this? And it also comes on the back of, I think about a week after I watched it, there was an announcement that HBO had decided to pull Gone with the Wind. I think they've now changed their minds on that, so they've gone back to streaming it. And then more recently we've had, I think it's David Walliams and Matt Lucas's show, whatever that was. I don't think I ever saw it.
Little Bricks,
also being pulled. So I thought, in light of that, is there something for us to explore here about our viewing habits, and does it say anything about us and our contribution, if you like, or our condoning of certain forms of discrimination by continuing to watch and subscribe to some of those provocative films, for want of a better term? I mean, things like Trading Places is also one of those films where some people might find it entirely inappropriate that Dan Aykroyd does a kind of blackface. You know, he dresses up as a black guy. I think it's funny, but you know, in this day and age, is it still appropriate? So I thought it'd be great to have a conversation together. So it's a pretty informal discussion, and hear what your thoughts are. Should we say enough is enough? It's inappropriate for us to be watching those sorts of films, and we should absolutely ban them and speak out against them. Or, as some people seem to be saying, it's idiotic to really be focusing on this conversation, and it's a distraction to get into discussions about banning films. It's a distraction from the bigger issue of tackling racial inequality, for example. So it's in that vein that I'm curious, I guess. I didn't come down, well, I have views, and I just wanted to hear what others who I respect and look to hear views. So that's where I really wanted to set the scene. So I don't know who wants to kick off.
I don't mind kicking off, Lorna, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it is appropriate to stop. Certainly now we wouldn't produce films or comedy like that, because it's known to be inappropriate. But obviously, historically, even going back to the 60s and 70s, yes, there were lots of films and comedies that were shown that was acceptable or tolerated at the time. Should we get rid of them? I don't see any need to keep them. I don't see any need to keep those films, because we're making new films. And also young people who wouldn't have probably seen those when they were made, wouldn't expect to see those sort of films now, but they might get influenced by them if they see them. Yes, it's part of our history, but let's put it in the history books by putting them in the, you know, away in the BBC archives or the IT, whatever Sky. I don't really think they need to be shown at all. I don't know about Gone with the Wind. It's such a long film. I don't remember, apart from it was a civil war, wasn't it? I don't remember exactly. I mean, obviously lots of films have got servants. I'm not sure whether there were paid servants. I don't know whether there were slaves. I think, I'm not sure, because I don't remember all of that film, to be honest. But I know there's lots of films and comedy that, you know, Alf Garnett, for one thing, you know, that's just one example, and some of the comedians as well. And they say now, even Little Britain wasn't that long ago, and they say they wouldn't do it now. So I don't see any need to show it. I just think we can, if comedy is, you know, with making fun of ourselves, but there's plenty of idiosyncrasies that we've all got that are really quite funny. Things like Victoria Wood used to do. They were kind of normal, everyday idiosyncrasies that were really quite funny. So I don't think it's appropriate, personally. I don't think we need it. Put it in our history, put it in our past. We're not making those things now. Why would we want to show them? That's my opinion.
Great. Thanks, Frances. So I'm going to open it to Eddie and Martin then, and hear your reactions to what Frances has said. So very strident views and very clear on her thinking about it. Martin, I'm going to...
Oh, sorry. Okay. I think totally understand what Frances is saying. I've got a couple of things, because I think this ties into a lot of conversations. So we're talking about programs of representation and questions of that. We're also talking about statues and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
For me, the same point is applicable to statues and the people that is to, you know, the questions of what you do. The basic point, you know, should we, you know, are these things, you know, good positive representations? I would say, you know, don't think it's a good thing. Even despite the fact that, like Lorna, I assume Lorna, you know, I like Blazing Saddles, I think.
You love it. Love it. I'm sorry, I love it.
Do I also go, you know?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I do all the time.
Yeah.
So I totally understand that, and I think it's, if you're someone who's sensitive to questions of representation and the history of things like, you know, blackface and why that's so specifically offensive, there's a historical context that makes that you know, a problem. Then I think you have to sort of admit, yeah, those things are problems. Where I get wobbly is right now is where our energy should be, you know, because for me, we have a moment here. We're in the throes of this sort of international debate, race, racism, and everything like that. And, you know, I've got a very, I could spend a long time talking about this, but I won't. But for a host of reasons, we've ended up just focusing on, you know, programs and films and statues. And we all know that those things aren't going to solve the problem. You know, my answer, again, generally would be, you know, no, let's focus on the big questions, the things that are actually going to make a difference.
Yeah. No, I'm completely with you. Your sound has gone, but I don't know if that's me or what.
Happening a lot, apparently. I don't know. I'll just model.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're dropping in and out. But yeah, I mean, like you, I'm with you. I think, and I know Eddie has particular views. So before I share my thoughts, I know, Eddie, you because you shared some thoughts with me about whether we make it people's individual choice to decide what they watch, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And I guess when you were saying that with me, sharing that with me, my thought was, but can we trust everyone to make the distinction between what's comedy or whatever it is and funny, and what is entirely inappropriate, that they need to kind of draw a line? So can we trust everybody to be I don't know, mature enough or able enough to make the distinction? So that was one thing I guess I thought about, Eddie, when you were saying it's individuals should be left to make their decisions. I don't know.
I don't think you can legislate, can you, for individual views? Francis mentioned Alf Garnett, and I used to think it was a good, really funny program. Alf Garnett was horrific, wasn't he, with his views? But you had Tony, whatever his name was.
Tony Booth, wasn't it? Tony Booth.
Yeah, Tony Booth, the son-in-law, and Eunice Stubbs as the counter to that. And obviously, I suppose lots of these programs are a parody of people, aren't they? And so essentially they're taking the piss out of these people. And if you get it, fine. If you don't, well, did you not make the program then? Well, I don't think so. Because it is social commentary, isn't it, in its own right. Blazing Saddles is, it whilst being incredibly funny. So I don't think we should get rid of these programs. I thought it was a bit stupid about Gone with the Wind. It was just a knee-jerk reaction, it seemed to me, that they wanted to be seen as doing the right thing without thinking about it. And it's like Churchill's statue, that's the wrong statue to attack, in my view. There are lots of other, worse people in the world, or worse things in the world, as you and Martin are saying, to focus on than just a block of concrete that doesn't really bother me one way or the other what happens to it, personally. So I don't think we should. I disagree with Francis, I suppose then, in saying I don't think we should get rid of those programs. I think we should continue to make them, and because they are commentating on the social and political scene that we're living in, and they are part of that history then.
Yeah, good points. So I guess part of this then is, are we focusing, I think one of the things Martin is raising, are we giving our energies to the wrong debate? Is one question. And then what does this mean for, the sort of focus that people have shifted to? So as you say, it's statues, it's certain programs, things like that are going on, and our energies are being diverted. I'm certainly reading some of the people in the media and stuff, who are trying to champion, for example, getting more Black writers on TV and producers and so on, are saying it's entirely inappropriate for us to give our time to this debate or this issue of banning things and tearing down statues and so on, because it just is a distraction. And it, as I said, some people say it's completely idiotic to do that. So if not that, because again, my thinking is, where would we draw the line on the blackface issue, for example? So I was reminded of the flack that Zoe Saldana got when she was cast to play the role of Nina Simone, and there was a big uproar that she's not dark enough. There was certain issues about her skin tone, and it also kind of played into this notion of blackface. So at what point do we say these are distractions, these are issues that are not worthy of our time, and let us think again? Don't know what your thoughts are. And
could I come in there at all, Lorna?
Yeah.
I don't think they're distractions, but if we're going to put them in an order of priority, I wouldn't put it at the top, no. I think it is important because we're kind of examining our culture when we're doing this, and film and comedy, it's all part of our culture. I get that things have happened in the past, and I do understand, and a lot of those things I'm not going to say weren't funny because I used to find Alf Garnett funny. I did used to feel very uncomfortable when he said certain words. But yes, of course, we were laughing at him and his character. I do get that. But no, I think talking about priorities, I think that we can do this anyway, can we not? It depends what else is going on. I mean, I notice that at the moment there's a call to get more black and minority ethnic people into the police force, which is a good thing. But I mean, I would have thought they would have been doing that anyway. A big investigation already, but all of a sudden they're calling again. But okay, maybe it's just give them a slap and reminded them, hey, you know, are we reflective of our police force? Obviously, we're not. But I mean, there are bigger issues to discussion, and I think that maybe, you know, what we really need is a very diverse group of people that can contribute to a broad agenda and discussion about how we can make this world, or this certainly Britain, fairer for everyone, and what does that mean? And I don't think that it hurts to do this in the background. I agree, it's not the highest priority. What I would say about statues is, though, statues are there because we don't really do them so much now, but to say that this person is to be admired. And I can quite understand Bristol taking down the statue of Colson, because it's not someone to be admired, whatever way you look at it. But then it's, what about Nelson Mandela statue? I get that. But let's not bother with statues then, although I'd probably be called I don't know, anti-cultural, but I think things like this are important as part of a wider debate, but it's the key focus. I think there should be more people brought in. For instance, like Rashford, the footballer that's enabled, you know, the free school meals because of his intervention. They should help, you know, I think he wanted to be part of a wider debate on child poverty, that sort of thing. I think we need to do that with a wider group of people from the public. So that's, you know, that's my view.
That's a really good point, because as you say, you know, Marcus Rashford has really stood up, and it's wonderful to see a young man who, you know, is using his influence and his following to get some change going. And the idea of statues and the idea of why are we spending time debating whether something should be banned or not because it says certain words, also then got me thinking about, because it seems to me that out of the difficulties of certain language, the N word, for example, or queer or disabled, came lots of movements that people actually positively adopted those terms. You know, the group NWA, and I better not say the word, and with attitude, Queer Eye, you know, the disabled movement, lots of things like that came about and came in the context of certain things being said, certain words being used, certain languages, and also, you know, the kind of representations that are going on. So has it always been negative? Are there opportunities that this debate and the banning of certain things can start to create for us to use as a way into starting to get change and to start to shift things? Eddie, what do you think?
I don't know, really. I'm not sure.
The N word, I must say.
Sorry?
I could never use the N word ever for anything.
No.
Indeed. I mean, I think it's one word that I really struggle with. It comes up time and again. It comes up time and again, for example, in Quentin Tarantino films. It's, you know, it's just kind of used willy-nilly here and there throughout many of his films. It comes up, as I said, in Blazing Saddles quite a lot. It's used in it quite a lot. And it certainly makes me cringe. It's a word that leaves me feeling deeply uncomfortable. But I think, as Eddie was saying, there's something, it seems to me, that is trying to bring attention to some of the crazy challenges and the incomprehensible nature of some of the the difficulties and the inequalities that are going on. I think that, for me, is what that film does. It starts to do it in a way that pokes fun, that you have to, yes, laugh, but also it does it in a way that makes you stop and think about what's really going on here. So whilst it's inappropriate, I think there is something about saying, if you hide away from being upfront about the use of language, because it still goes on today, the N-word is still used today, so why hide and pretend it isn't happening? So on that basis, it strikes me that why not expose these things, show them for what they are, and have the conversations about it.
I mean, there are some programs that, like, you know, programs like It Ain't Half Hot Mum, and like Little Britain, where they were blacking up and playing stereotypical characters, whether it was Asian or Thai, where it wasn't a parody. You know, it was basically you know, stereotyping people of different cultures and making fun of them, as you know, for people to laugh at. And it wasn't trying to give any sort of commentary on that. It was purely trying to suggest that was just a funny thing to do. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule about saying all programs are fine if I must be making some sort of social commentary if they are parodying various races or cultures. I think I know it's a hard thing to define, but it's almost about, well, what is the purpose? What are they intending to do with that representation of someone?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, is intention. What's the intention behind what's being created? So going back then, Francis, to what you were saying initially, you were saying they should be made historical records, if you like. Has your view shifted at all based on what you're hearing?
Not really. I mean, I do acknowledge what Eddie's saying. I do understand, and some of the things were funny. I myself have laughed at some of, because what they do, they take a tiny bit of a possible character that might not be representative at all of the whole of the, because you could never possibly do that, and then make it really exaggerate it. And it can be funny. I mean, I've laughed at lots of Little Britain, but I think if I had to have a hard and fast rule, I'd say, well, we can make lots of good comedy. And I'm sure that if they made Little Britain again, that they could make some really good comedy. They wouldn't necessarily need to do that, use those kind of characters, that's all. I mean, I do get that. I mean, particularly, I see there is a difference between it's a social commentary. We're showing a character that actually lives and works and thinks like that, like, say, Alf Garnett, for instance. And there were counter people. There was the sort of the Labour voter's son, and all that. I get that, and they were funny. I've seen lots of them. But I think, you know, I can laugh at it, but there are certain things he said, I think, oh God, no, don't say that. But there is a difference with, as Eddie says, making fun of people there isn't really, it's just a stereotype. But even that can be funny sometimes. So where do we draw the line? Are we going to have it too politically correct? I do understand that, but I don't think things will be made like that now. I still think there's some things we can get rid of. I don't know about, as I say, Blazing Saddles, all gone with the wind. I haven't watched the one and I can't remember the detail of the other. But there will be films that are deemed inappropriate, but I'm not sure how often they come on anyway. But they could go in the archives. Who would notice, really? I mean, if I saw Gone with the Wind was on, I don't think I'd watch it anyway. That's me.
It's very long.
I think part of a wider debate, maybe, you know, I think a wider, more representative group of people need to be involved in this debate. I think that's the point. I think all sorts of different people should have their views. Even counter views should be, you know, obviously should be listened to, and together we could come up with some sort of agreement about obviously how to go forward, but you know how we should deal with the history that's definitely part of the history.
Part of the history.
I mean, everyone's got their bad history and their good history. Every country has.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're saying that, because one of the things I think the marches at the weekend, particularly the far right marches, were saying this is about, you know, the tearing down of statues. They're saying this is our history. It's not about race. It's about our history, and you're trying to, or people are trying to deny or get rid of and eradicate part of their history in the pulling down of certain statues. And I guess the question is, as you're saying, is how do you draw the line in terms of what's appropriate, what's right, what are the counter views that we need to listen to and engage with and accommodate, and how do we do that in a way that doesn't reproduce some of the clearly inappropriate representations we've seen, but at the same time doesn't exclude others. Because, you know, it just strikes me that the more we go down the road of we're going to pull down statues, we're going to ban certain things, you immediately alienate those you want to engage in the conversation. So how do you get the balance right? How do you make that work? Thanks for coming back in, Martin. if you had some, yeah. So, that's okay. So if you came in just then, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that. You know, how do you get that balance?
No, I think that's a really good point. I think my answer to that would be that I think that question of balance is probably problematic to begin with as well. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're trying to determine, what do we mean by that? I think what we really mean by that is we're trying to determine what is or is not acceptable to us in the domain sort of representations of race, you know, for comedy or drama or whatever else, which aren't progressive. Put it that way. And ultimately, it goes to what Eddie was saying earlier in the chat, that I'm not sure you can legislate for that. You know, you can't really sort of dictate, well, this is an acceptable form of representation and this isn't. I don't think you can. And further, I think you've nailed it. The issue, I'm going to make a sort of broader point, so forgive me if I go off track, but I think the issue I have is generally how we sort of, we have this amazing moment where we're trying to make some real progress in terms of race relations and tackling racism, and that opportunity is being squandered, and I think it's being squandered because of a lack of leadership of a movement. You know, we have now this sort of leaderless, kind of bottom-up, self-organizing movement, and I think as a result, there is no agenda, there is no aim, there's no policy that sort of everyone can get behind and say, you know, this is what we're here for. I remember in the early 90s going on, my first march was a Stephen Lawrence march. And we all went along, we met in a park, there was a stand, and Doreen Lawrence spoke and other organizers spoke, and they laid out what it was about. This is why we're here. This is what we want. And we want you to come along and show your support for this cause, so it'll help us to get what we want. We were not active, we're supporting. They're the activists, we're helping them out to get what they get done. And so we go on the march and you know, we're singing songs, everyone's doing their stuff, but they know exactly why they're there.
Yeah.
These people need to show that there's lots of people behind them. That's it. That's all you're doing. And I think being lost in the arts of protest. Now protest is performance art. It's expression and it's creativity, but it has nothing to do with effective communication. It has nothing to do with advancing policy or agenda. And, you know, this is a long sort of slight detour for me, but I've really been thinking about this a lot, and how we got to this point where, you know, Little Britain and Winston Churchill seem to be the whole focus of the Black Lives Matter sort of protest. Or if it's not, I mean, I think that's unfair, because I think there are a lot of people who aren't talking about
it, yeah.
But because there's no leadership, because the activism hasn't been able to co-opt that anger, co-opt that energy and drive it towards a specific policy goal, everyone steps in and fills the vacuum. So it's, as quite rightly you said, Eddie, TV companies come and then they go, okay, we'll take that off the TV then, because, that must be, that's that. It's because they don't know.
Yeah.
There's no one to tell them, no, this is what we should be focusing on right now.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bit rambling and I'll step out there, but that was just something I really wanted to say. I think that's really a big part of this whole debate.
Yeah. Really, really valid point. I hadn't kind of reflected on it in that way, that, as you say, that there isn't a kind of coherent policy or sense of direction. Is that something that can happen given the context in which we're in, given that, because everything seems to be under the umbrella now of Black Lives Matter, everything seems to be kind of around that.
But that's a consequence of being kind of, now people say, oh, there are leaders and there's little pub, but no one knows them. They don't have visibility enough. They're not known by the march. The marches are quite, spontaneous. There's, bare bones of organizing, the route and the permissions and all that. And outside of that, there's nothing. There is a space that is, which has goals, which looks at the problem, diagnoses the problem, and then says, this is what we want to happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think, that's a big part of the problem,
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to bring Eddie and Francis in a minute. And I guess that, the phrase of let 1,000 flowers bloom is what I'm thinking. And does the times we're living in and the scale of the challenge require that we have to have lots of planting of different things, seeds all over the place in order to get to a point of something coherent? Martin, I don't know if you heard what I said, but I was saying the phrase let 1,000 flowers bloom. So you need to have lots of things potentially, but over time, a kind of a clear growth towards something that, that we can all coalesce around. Is there a sense of that happening, something very clear, a strategy happening? Or as you're saying, as Martin is saying, it's fractured, it's, there's no coherence to this. What's you guys' take on it, Francis and Eddie?
If I could come in, Lorna, I 100% agree with Martin. I think there definitely needs to be some leadership from this. Now, there's probably lots of really good people in all these different movements that contribute heavily, but there doesn't seem to be, as you say, statues, marches, counter marches. What is going to actually change? Because it's really what's needed is, okay, it certainly brought the issue to the fore. The more it was before, I have to say. It's been on the news, people have been talking about it, and they've got views on should statues go and all the rest of it, but they've firmly seen the marches and what people are saying. But this energy needs to be harnessed in some way, as Martin said, there needs to be leadership, and I think it needs to come from politicians, not for them to lead everything, not at all, but they need, how are we going to change policy? And I think you're right when you mentioned that horrible word strategy. That
I know. I couldn't think of any word.
We don't need another strategy. We want action. But actually, the strategy, it is a path, isn't it, to get to a vision. So to get to that vision, we need people to come together and say, well, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what are the hard core principles that must never happen? How does this statue or this culture or this program, does it actually hurt certain people? And if so, we shouldn't be doing it, we shouldn't be having it. And that has to be a broad debate around what's acceptable. So I think leadership is needed, and it has to involve politicians, as they've got the influence and the power. Certainly people like Marcus Rashford, he's offered his help actually around child poverty, which is a sub thing. It's a sub issue of BME agenda, because obviously a lot of children from disadvantaged backgrounds from those sort of areas, certainly not all of them. But I think it's, who do we bring in? I think it needs to be a wide group of people. Yeah. I think he's absolutely right.
Yeah. Eddie, and then I'm going to come back, and Martin. Yeah, Eddie, your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think there can be a mixture of both and local action. I think there needs to be both. I think local action can look at its own context, its own circumstances, its own priorities, but within some sort of national framework. And there are things there, aren't they, already that we know that could be, could be some set goals or mission that is set out. There's the Windrush generation, there's Grenfell, there's health inequalities highlighted by COVID. So there's a number of issues there. There's the Lamy report, which I've just looked up, I think had 35 recommendations. So there's stuff there that can be acted on. And we certainly don't need another, Boris bloody inquiry headed by somebody who's, going to undermine it, seemingly. So, when I was a manager in local government, we were all asked to write a race equality strategy. How were we going to tackle race equality in our work setting and in terms of access to services that we provided? And that was useful in the sense of it concentrated your mind on what could you do locally and what did you need to do locally, but within the legal framework, etc., that existed. So I think there is a place for both national leadership, as Martin said, and national priorities, but there has to be flexibility at a local level about the how, and maybe some specific extra priorities that local government, health people, and so on should be focusing on.
Yeah, good point. And Martin, I saw when Francis said politicians, you were disagreeing. So where's leadership going to come from then?
It's two types of leadership, I think. I look at the Mark Strasher thing. Actually, is a really, really, really good point. What Mark Strasher did was he had a clear idea of a simple goal that he could achieve, used his profile in social media, got it going in the media, co-opted the media, got the narrative going through media, and then turned to the politicians and said, do this. Yeah. And so they tried to resist for a long time, but it was just so obvious that he was on the right side of the thing that they had to relent. Right? So the leadership actually came from an individual, and he was that is the best example of activism I've seen in the last 3-4 years. He got onto an issue and he whipped up support and then he drove it to the decision makers. And that's why it is the politicians, because they legislate. They don't necessarily have to come up with the ideas. They come up with definitions of what to do. Sometimes you need to tell them what they have to do. That's what Brexit was. Brexit is a bottom-up, movement that visas, and it co-opted the agenda, and it co-opted people, and then it turned to the government, or then it turned to the politicians and said, "This is what we want," and then they gave them a referendum, and they won it, right? So actually, that's obviously the best.
But is that not what we're seeing with Black Lives Matter then? Is that the concern, that you haven't got a clear narrative? You haven't got those who are being absolutely explicit about where we're going to go, and then here politicians, over to you to make this happen. Is that the concern?
Well, my evidence to support my point is, who, has a group of activists come forward to sort of control the narrative and drive it to a certain point, and then turned to the politicians and said, these are the things that we want, in the same way that, I'd say Marcus Rashford, Dominic Cummings, Nigel Farage are able to do with their issues. I'd say no. I'd say the reason why we're talking about, should we have statues, powers, is because of that deficit of activism. It's the activism that's actually failed here. Something happened, and I do think you can co-opt movements. I'm not saying you have to initiate the movement. Black Lives Matter, no one could have predicted, that in the UK, it'd be as passionate about what is essentially an African American question but that simpatico that Black Britons have with African Americans led to this sort of, a passionate outpouring of support. And then we started to turn our eyes, look at, the issues, but there was no one there to step in and say, yes, and, this is the problem that we should be focusing on. When we think our context for this, it's not the same as the African American, I'd argue it's far more severe there, but we have our context too. And, yeah, we've the activist space has sort of failed in not providing a leadership to something that was there. So I think proof of failure.
Okay. So we've got examples of good leadership and activism in Marcus Rashford. Who else do you think we could be looking to help drive this agenda forward? Are there any other models or examples we can think of that would be relevant in this context?
Brexit is the perfect. It's look at what they did. Dominic Cummings is often vilified. People actually have to analyze what he did. He is incredibly strategic. He understood that, he didn't need to sell. But here's a key thing, I think, generally for the left. He didn't feel the need to sell his ideology to the public. He just wanted the policy. So specifically, he didn't need everyone to agree with his assessment of why he hates the EU. He just wanted the policy. So he shared the message to, if you go back to the Brexit campaign, literally Brexit was going to solve every single problem Britain had. There was a problem that Brexit couldn't solve, right? Because they didn't care whether you believed, came to the same ideological conclusion that, the EU is evil or Britain is a proud nation, stand on its own. They didn't care about that. They just said, no
one out.
Policy. So that's how they set up something, what is it, the Muslims for Britain, and they tell the Muslims that you're being discriminated against because of the EU. Then we can have a more generous visa relationship with Commonwealth countries. Utter bollocks, obviously. We all know it's bollocks, but it didn't matter. It got them, they were able to get a foothold in the community because they touched an issue. They took it and they said, look, this is what we can do for you. And it doesn't matter.
Are we not seeing that with, again, it's under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter. Are we not seeing we need to address policing, for example? We need to address child poverty, for example. We need to address education attainment and all the rest of it. Are we not seeing, in effect, examples of that, under Black Lives Matter, in effect, Brexit, so Black Lives Matter is about Brexit. And then the individual elements are, they're talking to the Muslim is about the policing, for example.
Policies
I'm going to come back to you guys in a minute.
I think the policies are too diffuse. They're all over the place. It's it's too spread out for me.
Yeah.
The Brexit.
So Eddie's agreeing with you. I think I thought I heard a yay.
Yeah, I do. I think you need just 2 or 3 things, aren't you? That you want, that is the purpose. That is what you want to change. If you say you want to tackle health, housing, education, as Martin's just said, it's all too big, and everyone would agree. But then we all know it gets dissipated and watered down, and nothing really changes. So what would be the 2 or 3 things that people really felt were, this is what would make some, people's lives better and improve them,
And as it relates to the current protest, we're looking at, sources of division in society and so on and so forth. So what can we do to heal, try and make it sort of as close to the issue, as close to the protest as possible, would be my argument.
So Francis, I'm going to come on to you in a minute, because what I thought has been interesting for somebody who was kind of going through their education in the 80s and starting to work, the anti-racist movement stuff seems to be coming back to the fore in a way that it had disappeared. Certainly it felt to me throughout the 2000s up to this point. I'm not convinced that that's the umbrella, because that seems to be where the focus is now. We need an anti-racist movement. We want to be all anti-racists. But is that, again, a question of, is there something under an anti-racist banner that we can start to identify the 2 or 3 that Eddie talked about, the 2 or 3 priorities, or the 2 or 3 things? Is anti-racism the appropriate banner, umbrella, or is it something else? Do we need a new narrative? Do we need a new way of thinking about the challenges we're facing? Because it just felt to me like, well, we've been here before. We've had anti-racism. We've done all this stuff. Yeah. What's going to be different this time?
Could I come in for a second there? I think it could be the catalyst. I definitely think, and it needs addressing, but it could, what would make it a debate that people would think, well, I'll have a say on that, whoever they are. I don't know what, something about being fair, a fair society. What's a fair society? Is it fair for you? Is it fair for you? How can we make it fairer so that everyone's got access and opportunity? And there'll be a lot of issues that will be sought through under that banner: poverty, education, representation in the media, and in different paths, different stratas of society. It's something, I think Keir Starmer said something about we want to be a Britain or a country that's leading for the good, or something. I'm not sure, the moral good. Show what a good society we are, because we listen to people, we're fair to people, and this is how we're doing it. And we realise that there are some places where it's fairer for others than for others, and we have to address that first. It's a bit bland, but it's got to be something, perhaps, that, I think there are issues that need addressing first, though. And maybe those are the ones under a broader umbrella that should be addressed first, because they're the most burning ones. I don't know. I haven't got the answer.
Well, two things arise for me. One is, and it's not something I have a definitive answer to, is whether the constant focus on race is helpful or not as a concept. So I'd really welcome some thought to that, because I think it's really unhelpful that we continue to have that as part of the language, but I'd like to hear others' views. And the second thing is, because we've been having these conversations with Sharif over the last few weeks, and we're all talking about now a better, fairer, more just anti-racist world. Does what Sharif has been talking with us about provide us with a framework to start to move forward or think about how we address some of these issues and challenges? So those are my 2 questions. Is it helpful to continue to talk in terms of race and the concept of race? And is there something we can start to look to Sharif's work to help us to move forward?
I think there definitely is, because everyone would feel they've got a part in it. And some people might be alienated, by race. The problem is there is an issue there about race, but maybe we should make it that kind of agenda where that will obviously have to be addressed anyway, because it doesn't work for all, doesn't work for that section of society. So we'd have to address that, and probably address that first. I don't know. I agree. Something like it's just because I think the longer we continue to think and talk in terms of race, the more it perpetuates it as it's something about BME, black people, it's something for those people over there. It's nothing to do with me, I'm not a white person, but it's not a white person's issue, it's those people over there's issue. And it's an incredibly unhelpful term, I think. So I would want to argue that we should certainly start to move away from the notion and the concept of race, if at all possible. So that's certainly one thing. So I'm going to ask again, you guys, thanks Francis, so Eddie and Martin, thoughts on what I've just said and what Francis...
You're going to say it should go back to class, really, aren't you?
No! Not at all.
I think it's a conundrum, isn't it? Because there rightly should be a focus on race. Then it generates people saying, but what about?
Yeah.
You know, what about misogyny? What about
Sexism.
What about Jews?
Yeah.
You know, all these things that are prevalent as well. So I think there are those issues, and I don't know what the answer is about that, except making connections, across all those issues in some way, or not issues, or people's interests, if you like, whatever they may be.
Martin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think both Eddie and Francis have been right on the money for me. I think there absolutely is, I think, a racial. There are issues that are directly pertinent to race, but it may not be helpful to talk about it in that way. We have to accept we are minority in a country, and and I can't remember who said it. Someone said, there has not been any civic change as it relates to racial progress that's happened without the white community being fully behind. Not once, I think it was KRS-One actually, the rapper, but he said it. But and if you look at it like that, then you understand what the job of activism is. Then it's weighed the majority. That's the job, And if that's the job, you have to look at what is an effective communication or strategy, And at the moment, I think you have to conclude, I don't know how, because it's so polarized. We're in the midst of a culture war, and then race is one of the real battle lines. And, look, some people are never going to come around, right? They are ideologically dug in and opposed to what you're trying, and there's no point trying to appease them. But there are lots of well-intentioned people who, rightly or wrong, will be turned off by the mention of race or white. They won't respect that message that white people are privileged. They're just not going to internalize. So, what's the benefit of trying to convince them that I understand someone who's convinced of this will say, well, in order for them to understand the solution, they've got to understand the nature of the problem. But I maintain, and I look at Brexit, I just no longer believe that's the case. People have to understand. You've got, the Brexit mob got people out there saying, we want WTO terms. And they didn't even know what the WTO meant. No, but they saying it because, they packaged the issue in a way that they could understand. Not necessarily their understanding of the issue. It was just, this is what I want, and how do I get all these people who don't know what I'm talking about? How do I get them to do it? And so I'm
sorry.
Actually, yeah.
Sorry, because you were dropping in and out, so I wasn't hearing you very well. So, because we're running out of time now, I want us to kind of end on a note of optimism, if you like. What's the way forward? So we've identified leadership, activism, fragmentation, too many disparate things that everybody's trying to do without clear narrative and so on. And so where can we on our Tuesday tonic in our little part of the world, where can we focus our energy? What can we bring and what can we do to kind of address some of the issues we've been talking about today? What's one thing we can do from here?
Ooh. Well, we need to do something, otherwise I suppose we're just walking.
I suppose we could learn from Marcus Rashford, as Martin was saying. One issue, focus on something and go for it. Something that's close to your heart, and that might be something in your family, in your locality, in your community, or it may be something national. But what he showed is if you feel strongly about something. Then, as Martin said, he got the media on board. Very, very, people say he's very articulate. I mean, he's reasonably articulate. He's not very articulate, but he had a passion about it, and you had to respect him for that because it came from the heart. It came from his own experience. So nobody could doubt his authenticity about it. And I suppose that's the message I'll partly take away from this discussion, which is about, you know, how do you focus on something that's really important to you, whatever that might be, and in whatever context it might be, family, community, national. And go for it.
And go for it, yeah, indeed. And you've said some great words. One is you spoke with passion, drawing on experience and being really authentic. So those are some really important kind of drivers, if you like, for where we need to, or how we need to move forward. Francis, what would your thoughts be on this? What could we do?
I think we probably need to have, I'm not saying keep talking and nothing come of it, but I think we probably need to try and get more people involved, different people involved, because it's all very well, we've got our views and that's fine, you know, whatever people might think of them, but we're just a very small part of society, very, very small, from our different backgrounds and beliefs and whatever. So I think in the end we do need to involve politicians, but as Eddie said, I think, yeah, you can do that at the community level and at the strategic level. Indeed you can, and then take it. And I think that often, you know, politicians will just roll on and just say, well, this is what we want to do this year. And it's only when something stops in it, you know, in their tracks, and oh God, what's going on now? Oh God, Black Lives Matter. What are they doing? And they have to kind of stop and listen. And I think it probably does need to come from communities and from the ground. How we harness that kind of energy, we probably just need to think about it a bit more. We're not going to have all the solutions now and say, this is what we're going to do. But I think we probably need to try and draw in a broader discussion on it. And then, yes, definitely, with the aim of, we can make a proposal maybe to our MPs, maybe to a committee of MPs. That's probably what we should do, to say we want to look into it, or we want you to bring, set up a committee. Well, a committee's probably not. Or just have a different way of doing it, like use forums, and here are the forums that you need to take into consideration, and each forum or community will give their views on it, and it would feed into a bigger debate. Because whilst Marcus Rashford was excellent in what he did, and he made the U-turn on the policy that made the government U-turn, it was a specific issue about free school meals through the school holidays. And he's achieved that. But this, what we're talking about, is a much bigger debate. It is about fairness, and it's about society. It's more complex. So we need to give it that status, really. So I think we just need to try and perhaps bring more people into this somehow.
Yeah. And that's the $1,000 question as to how to do that. I mean, obviously the technology exists, so we don't have to worry about meeting in, you know, big rooms or anything. But it's the getting people on board, and what is the narrative. You know, Martin says Brexit was a great strategy, if you like, and a great way of approaching it. Is there some way for us to think about what is that narrative, what is our equivalent Brexit that we can then use to harness and get people behind what we're trying to do? So Martin, I'm going to ask your view now as to what can we do from here? How can we move forward from here?
That's very unfair, because Eddie and Francis have just said.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So just say what they've said.
What they said, you know. Sorry, but that
Martin, really, you should make a film about it, maybe.
Yeah, Martin makes a film about it. There you go.
Throw that in the pot.
You know, I'd love to. I think maybe just copying what Eddie said, but putting it in different words. I think it's that focus on doing it at whatever level, your community. You know what I'm saying? You know, I think one of the things I do is, like, you know, I talk to people in my neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood which is, you know, there's lots of conservative voters here, but I try to convince them of my side. And one thing I guess I've learned from that is you can't, you know, there's a sort of a lingua or a, you know, there's jargon associated with a lot with progressive politics. And people have no idea what you're talking about, or they just dismiss it, you know, it's just woke. That's just woke stuff.
It's
right?
woke, yeah.
You know, and this goes back to what I'm saying about communicating. You know, it's not important that you know the right terminology, or you understand, you know, the paradynamics of, you know, it's not that. That's not important. Just get on board with what I'm trying to do. You know what I mean? Or get on board with the thing that I support. And I do think I've had some success talking to people, just talking to them and saying,
talking to people.
I hear your side. This is how I see it. And even if it's just that they're less hostile to my point of view, I think that's a win. You know, that one-to-one over a beer. You know, it's not massive. But that's, I think, hope. You know, I'd like to. That can also help too.
Brilliant. I mean, certainly when I set up this forum, or this, whatever it is I'm calling it, the intention and my intention behind it was to try and create that space for debate, but not just for talking, with a view to influencing what comes next. Because whilst it was COVID at the time, clearly this is, you know, the death of George Floyd has also happened, and that's yet another watershed moment, it seems to me, that we could potentially start to see change. The issue is for me doing this is how do you, because I'm not a Marcus Rashford, I don't have 20 million YouTubers or followers or whatever it is, but I know in my heart that it's right to be doing this. So the question then becomes how to use this platform to do some of what Francis is saying, to have the broader debate, for example, or to do, Martin, what you've suggested in terms of having a specific narrative, or to see this as providing a, if not a leadership platform, because when I spoke to Sharif about it, he said don't see it necessarily as leadership, but as facilitating dialogue and discussion and influencing others. So that's the challenge I've got for me, that I'm still struggling with, how to make this work in real terms. So, you know, how do you get the 20 million people, or even, you know, 20 people saying, yes, this is so important, we're going to get on board, we're going to do our bit, we're going to take messages from here and we're going to apply them locally in our spots, and nationally, wherever we may be. So I'm hopeful that we can still continue to use this as a way for us to explore ideas, and if you know people, kind of bring them into the conversations so that we can start to actually have some influence and make some shifts.
Fantastic.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. We should go away and think about how we could continue the work, but I think part of it is we need to try and draw a wider audience in. The problem with a wider audience is it's very difficult for everyone to have this. So maybe some, I don't know, Martin would know about this, maybe lots of vox pops, or just quick snapshots of what people are thinking in I don't know, we probably just need to think about that. But certainly it's something that we should keep doing, because we know that something needs, well, lots of things
needs to happen. Absolutely. And here's a moment for change, and I think everybody's saying here's a seminal moment for change. It's what role can we play? And certainly I'm hoping that by doing this, I'm playing a role. But how do we then measure the impact of what we're doing? And hopefully we're seeing that something is changing. That's what I'd like to think anyway. But thank you as always, guys. It's really great. And we'll continue, even if it's just the four of us, but we'll continue to meet and we'll have the conversations. And please feel free to also come up with your topics and things you want to have conversations about. Don't just leave it to me to come up with ideas and things to discuss. So if you've got anything you think, that's something, you know, to bring to the group, and give me plenty of notice so I can circulate it around to others, that would be great. All right.
Okay.
So have a great week, and see you again soon. Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Take care. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. See you soon. Take care. Bye. See you soon. Take care. Take care, Francis. See you soon.
Thank you. And you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. I'm just waiting for you to go so that I'm not going to leave you hanging. Are you still there?
Trying to get out, and
Or shall I end it and then you can get out?
That's probably the best thing.
Okay. All right. Take care, sweetie. See you soon.
Okay. Bye.